Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Let's give a round of applause to the River City Mindfulness Group and their Buddhist sound bath. Isn't that beautiful? My name is Kate Moorehead Carroll, and I am called the Dean of this cathedral, which means the head priest. And I want to say on behalf of St. John's Cathedral that we are honored to have all of you here tonight. Thank you for joining us for this 10th annual Iftar celebration and dinner. Our leaders have asked me to describe this space to you, and I want to tell you that all of our worship spaces use architecture to praise God in the various ways we experience God. In the Christian tradition, we are called to live into the life of Jesus. So this church is actually on the highest point in Jacksonville. This is called Billy Goat Hill. It's a very little hill. Now that we have all the skyscrapers, they dwarf it and make people forget. But it belonged to the Timucua tribe many, many years ago, for probably hundreds, if not 1,000 years. Then the first Christians climbed up this hill and decided to build a church here, and the church was built in 1834. It was then burned to the ground in the Civil War, rebuilt, and then burned to the ground again in the Great Fire of 1901. So this cathedral was finished in 1906. Ancient Christian churches face east, where the sun rises because we worship the Son of God. And as you look around, you can see that we live into the whole life of Jesus. We begin with the baby Jesus over the west wall, that way. The entire sanctuary is shaped like a cross. You see, this is the big part, and that's the cross. We end with Jesus in heaven looking at us, and we live inside of his life. In the Middle Ages, they could not read, many people, so they would learn the stories from the stained glass windows. We also, if you look up, it's meant to look like an ark or a ship, because during our worship, we sail into the presence of God. And our holiest moment is different from, say, the Baptists, who might have a podium in the center. Our holiest place is our altar, where we share the bread and the wine together every Sunday. We are so grateful that you are here. I want you to know that there are bathrooms. If you go through this doorway straight, you can find the bathrooms. And you may be seeing people who are wearing purple. Those are our ushers, our volunteers from the cathedral, and they can answer any questions that you have or show you where to go. I want to thank our partners, Interfaith Jax and the Jacksonville Jewish Center. We are so grateful to have this opportunity to be here with you this evening. And now I want to welcome our Emcee for the evening, Dr. Parvez Ahmed, who is one of the founders of Interfaith Jax. Let's welcome Parvez.
Good evening. Salam, shalom, and peace be with you all. On behalf of Interfaith Jax, the Jacksonville Jewish Center, and St. John's Cathedral, welcome to the 10th Annual Interfaith Iftar. Thank you for being here as we gather around this year's theme, the courage to be curious. I want to begin with the words from the Sufi poet, Rumi. He said, "Come, come, whoever you are, giving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken 1,000 vows. Come yet again. Come, come. Those words capture the spirit of this evening. This is not a gathering for the perfect or for those with all the answers. It is a gathering for the curious, for the open-hearted, for those who are willing to step towards one another rather than run away from each other. Nearly a decade ago, in a world where religious silos can feel tall and separate, along with my good friends Rabbi Lubliner and Yildirim Alex Sivar, we asked a simple question. What if we created a space, not for argument, but for authentic encounter? What if we built friendship across our differences? From those questions grew the Interfaith Iftar, hosted for 9 years at the Jacksonville Jewish Center, where we created a table wide enough to reflect the breathtaking mosaic of Jacksonville's faith traditions. Over the years, we have witnessed moments that still take our breath away. The Muslim call to prayer being offered in a Jewish sacred space, Muslims and Christians joining Jewish worshippers for Ma'ariv or Shabbat prayers, volunteers of different faiths preparing kosher meal side by side, neighbors watching each other pray with respect and reverence. These are not small gestures. These are courageous ones. And that courage begins with curiosity. Because curiosity says, tell me your story. Help me understand your tradition. Let me see the world through your eyes. It does not erase our differences. It honors them. And honoring them strengthens us. So tonight, as we prepare to break the fast together and listen to the wonderful lineup of speakers, we renew something deeper. Our shared commitment to a Jacksonville where diversity is a strength, where faith is not a fault line, and where we continue to say to each other, come, come again. Come to the table. Come to conversation. Come to the work of building a community. Before we continue, I want to share something very practical. Even though this event is free, this evening is not without cost. Beyond the many hours of volunteer labor, our partner organizations bear significant cost. If you feel moved to support this work, we encourage you to consider making a donation, and at your dinner table, you will see QR codes that will take you to the donation websites. I would now like to recognize our elected officials in the audience today, Councilman Michael Boylan, Councilman Rahman Johnson, back there. Any other elected officials? I also want our members of the clergy to please stand up and be recognized. All members of the clergy, can you please stand to be recognized? Past or present? Thank you. And now it will be my honor to invite my friend Chester Akins from the mayor's office to come forward and read the mayoral proclamation.
Good afternoon. My name is Chester Akins, and I am the Special Assistant to Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan, who unfortunately is unable to be here this evening, but she wanted to present this proclamation for Interfaith Awareness and Harmony Day. Whereas The city of Jacksonville is strengthened by the rich diversity of its residents and faith communities whose traditions of compassion, service, and fellowship enrich the well-being and unity of our city. And whereas nearly a decade ago, recognizing the differences of faith and tradition can often too become barriers rather than bridges, local leaders sought to create meaningful opportunities for our neighbors of different faiths to come together in dialogue, celebration, and mutual understanding. And whereas, following a fellowship experience in Jerusalem, Muslim and Jewish community leaders from Jacksonville committed to building deeper relationships across faith traditions here at home, leading to the creation of the annual Interfaith Iftar gathering at the Jacksonville Jewish Center, open to all residents. And whereas, through the partnership of Interfaith Jax, the Jacksonville Jewish Center, and the St. John's Cathedral, this gathering has grown into a cherished tradition in which people of many faiths and of no faith share a sacred space to learn from one another, break bread together during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. And whereas moments that once seemed unlikely, including a Muslim neighbors offering the call to prayer with Jewish and Christian sacred spaces, and volunteers of multiple faiths preparing meals that honor both kosher and halal traditions, have become powerful symbols of trust and respect and shared humanity in Jacksonville. And whereas this year's theme, to be courageous and curious, reminds us that listening across differences, asking sincere questions, and engaging one another with humility are essential to building a city where all people can feel respected and welcomed. And whereas Jacksonville's commitment to interfaith engagement reflects the belief that our community grows stronger when our neighbors encounter one another with goodwill and choose connection over division. Now, therefore, on behalf of Mayor Donna Deegan of the City of Jacksonville, I do hereby proclaim February 26, 2026 as Interfaith Awareness and Harmony Day in the City of Jacksonville, and encourage all residents to celebrate the diversity of faith and the belief within our community, and to continue building bridges and understanding through dialogue, fellowship, and the courageous practice of curiosity. And I want to invite, let's see, Dean Kate, and is Rabbi Lubiter here, and Mr. Savar. Is Mr. Savar here? Can we all come together and take a picture? And Parvez, you come on up here too.
Thank you, Chester, and thank you to the mayor for her wonderful words. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for our evening. Our keynote speaker, Megan Phelps-Roper, embodies courage in a way few people ever have. Megan Phelps-Roper did not grow up on the margins of extremism. She grew up at its center. As a member of the Westboro Baptist Church, she became one of its most visible advocates, defending beliefs that placed her in direct opposition to much of the world. And yet, what ultimately changed her life was not outrage. It was not humiliation. It was not force. It was a conversation. In her widely viewed TED Talk, Megan reflects on something remarkable, that the people who helped transform her thinking were not the ones who shouted the loudest, but those who asked sincere questions, who engaged her arguments thoughtfully, who treated her with a level of dignity she had not expected. Curiosity extended to her became the doorway to her own curiosity about others. That journey led her to leave the only community she had ever known. It cost her relationship, and it required tremendous courage, and it reshaped her life's work. Today, Megan speaks around the world about how we can disagree without dehumanizing, how we can challenge ideas without condemning people, and how bridge building begins not with surrendering conviction, but with listening deeply. Her memoir, Unfollow, which is available, signed copies are available outside this door. You can pick it up after the program or after dinner. Her book chronicles that journey from certainty to humility, from isolation to connection. In a time where division often feels amplified and polarization is profitable, Megan's story reminds us that transformation is possible and that curiosity is not weakness, it is strength. Please join me in welcoming Megan Phelps-Roper.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight. It is a privilege to be invited into a space like this, to speak about ideas that have completely altered the course of my life and forever changed how I see the world. In particular, why and how we connect with people across even the deepest ideological divides. When I was 18, I found myself in Las Vegas for the first time. I was less than 2 weeks from my high school graduation, and there I was, spending the week before finals, making appearances on Howard Stern's Live in Las Vegas, alongside my mom, my 2 cousins, my 11-year-old sister, and my 8-year-old brother. My little brother was so adorable. He had these platinum blonde curls and enormous blue eyes and sweet little dimples. So you can imagine how jarring it was for the audience to see the t-shirt that my brother was wearing. Bold white letters on a navy blue shirt that read, "GodHatesFags.com." We'd had the shirts made especially for the occasion, and all of us matched. The show was broadcast live on closed-circuit TV, and all over Vegas we were recognized and pointed out. Hey look, it's the God Hates Fags girls. This was life as I had always known it. Before I could read, I was learning why God despised gays, Jews, and everyone who wasn't part of our church. Before I started kindergarten, I was standing on public sidewalks, holding signs with messages like, "Gays are worthy of death." My earliest memories begin at about age 3, when I would sit in the living room with my family, memorizing Bible verses and the church's interpretation of them, that God hated most of mankind, and that I was so terribly lucky to have been born at Westboro Baptist Church, the only known place on earth where God meets with his people. With only 70 or so congregants, our church was tiny, but what we lacked in size, we made up for in the force of our beliefs. I grew up with the understanding that I was in grave danger at all times, that the world and its inhabitants were full of evil, and that they would seduce me away from the truth unless I maintained constant vigilance. This was the story that I was told and that I believed for the first 26 years of my life. Because my grandfather was the church's founder and my mother was its most influential member and organizer, it's no surprise that I found a special place there too. My mom used to call me her right hand, and at her side, I became a skilled defender of Westboro and its many controversial doctrines. It didn't hurt that both of my parents and most of the adults in the church were attorneys, so their arguments were well crafted and tightly woven, and I learned them well. Whether it was for the Tyra Banks show or local television news, I was frequently called upon to give interviews. I would travel with my mother to represent the church's positions in classrooms across the country, from high schools and universities to the FBI National Academy at Quantico. I felt so thankful to God for giving me the ability to speak for him. And then, like a gift from God Almighty himself, along came Twitter. I discovered the platform and became Westboro's voice there when I was 23. I had no way of knowing that it would be Twitter, of all things, that would be the beginning of the end of my unshakable faith in the God and worldview of Westboro Baptist Church. To me, Twitter seemed perfect, a tool that was easy to use and so effective at getting attention. It rewarded clarity and simplicity and directness, which our message had in spades. After all, it only took a tenth of a tweet's 140-character limit to announce that God hates Jews. It required so little effort to find and attack Westboro's targets, and I was ready and willing to defend our beliefs against them all. But what I was not prepared for was kindness. David Abitbol was one of the first people I targeted after joining Twitter. He was the Israeli-Canadian creator of a blog called Jewlicious, and I found him at number 2 on this list of the 100 most influential Jews on Twitter. I researched David and the blog and immediately started tweeting. Among other things, I told him how Jews needed to really repent of their sins. He mistook the tone of my tweet and responded, "Thanks, Megan. That's handy, what with Yom Kippur coming up." I made sure my next post wouldn't be misunderstood. I accused the Jews of killing Jesus and warned David that Jewish customs were dead, rote rituals that would take them all to hell. David's response was swift, cutting, and angry, and it was exactly the sort of response that I had expected in the first place. But soon after that initial skirmish, something changed. I kept peppering David's feed with condemnatory messages, and his responses morphed from angry insults to friendly barbs. He started asking questions about our picket signs, and I started asking him questions about Jewish theology, both of us genuinely curious how the other had come to such different conclusions about the Bible. We were still clearly adversaries, but there was something new there too, this human element that was impossible to ignore. David's friendliness made me incredibly wary. I knew he was evil, but here he was, teaching me Hebrew so that I could read the Old Testament and sending me funny videos about nerdy Christians. In spite of my wariness, I discovered that I liked David, which for me meant that it was time to protest him. I first met David when my church picketed the Jewlicious Festival in Long Beach, California, and then again 9 months later in New Orleans. Both times, David came out to the picket line to chat with me. In New Orleans, he brought me halva from the shuk in Jerusalem, where he lives, and I brought him some of my favorite peppermint chocolate. He flipped the bar over and started teaching me about the kosher symbols on the packaging, while I listened earnestly and held my God hates Jews sign. We had reached a strange sort of truce, though neither of us ever backed off from our positions. Shortly after New Orleans, though, I suddenly stopped talking to David. In a conversation about one of our protest signs that read, "Death penalty for fags," David asked me a question that I didn't have an answer for. "What about this member of your church who had a child out of wedlock?" he asked me. "That's another sin that deserves the death penalty, isn't it? And anyway, didn't Jesus say, 'Let he who is without sin cast the first stone'?" I didn't know what to say, so I didn't answer him. I thought about this church member, a woman I loved dearly, my mother, in fact, and how we had always defended her. Everyone sins, we would say. The question is whether or not you repent. We argued that she was okay and didn't deserve that punishment because she had repented. We had been calling for the death penalty for gays since the 90s, but this was the first time I thought through the fact that instituting the death penalty completely cuts off the opportunity to repent and be forgiven, which is a major foundation of Christian theology. I tried to find a solution to what seemed like gross hypocrisy to me, but there was no good answer. My questions were swiftly shut down by the church elders, and although I tried to suppress it for a time, it was this, the undeniable understanding that we were human and fallible, that our judgment was not divine. This was the beginning of the end for me. Although I cut off my communication with David after that exchange, I continued my conversations with other users on Twitter, not realizing that they were changing me too. What I failed to see was that the dynamics on Twitter were fundamentally different from anything I had encountered before. At protests, there was screaming and chanting and mocking and anger and sometimes even assaults and arrests. On Twitter, there was for sure a lot of chaos, but it could also be calm. It was questions and jokes and quiet in a way that the protests rarely were. And because pickets only ever lasted for a few hours at most, there was never any way to develop any sort of rapport with counter-protesters. On Twitter, the conversation was ongoing. It lasted for months that turned into years. I continued to argue the Bible with other users on the platform, but we also celebrated one another's birthdays and anniversaries. I listened to the music they recommended. I watched their children grow older in the photos they were posting. I saw their grief when loved ones passed, and in time, I began to grieve with them. I was learning a new story about my adversaries, and for me, this was an astonishing and deeply terrifying turn of events, because this was not the truth that I had been taught. These were satanic arguments and feelings that would lead me to hell. But the dialogue on Twitter worked in the other direction as well. It helped my opponents see me as a human being, and their behavior also changed. In spite of the terrible things I was saying, they reached across that divide to listen to me. In spite of their abhorrence of my belief, they befriended me. And as they developed a more nuanced understanding of Westboro's doctrines, they were able to find more effective ways to kindly and respectfully challenge me. When those seeds of doubt planted by David and others eventually bloomed, I left Westboro knowing that my family and community would cut me out of their lives forever. They had to. They believed that God required them to deliver me to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. The church had been my entire identity, so when I walked away from Westboro, I walked into a void. I didn't know who I was or what I believed. I was terrified of my own mind, this mind that had been convinced, and not just convinced, but passionately dedicated to the idea that my primary duty in life was to warn the world that they were doomed. I knew that I had hurt so many people in the process, and I had no idea how to make any of it right. Into the midst of that void walked David Abitbol. David didn't shame me for the things that I had said and done in the name of the church. Instead, he stepped in to help. He saw me adrift in the world and terrified of everyone in it, and he offered me guidance and wisdom. He invited me back to the Jewelicious Festival, which I had protested 3 years earlier, to meet the people that I had been taught to despise. And again, I was floored by the kindnesses that they extended to me. The couple who ran the festival, a rabbi and his wife, and their 4 young children, invited me to stay with them in their home for several weeks. They answered my endless theological questions about Judaism and their interpretation of the Bible. They let me tag along to synagogue with them, and we spent Saturdays enjoying their Shabbat table. These were the same people that I had targeted with signs saying, "Your rabbi is a whore," and they quickly became like family to me. That first year after I left Westboro, scenes like that played out again and again among many communities that I had targeted as a church member. Evangelical Christians in Iowa, members of the gay community in Los Angeles, and atheists in New York. In each instance, one of the things that I was most impressed by was the open-mindedness of the people in these groups. The Christians I met spoke openly of their disagreement with certain Bible passages. My Orthodox Jewish friends didn't disdain Jews who were less observant. And it was such a striking contrast to my life at Westboro, where any deviation from the party line would result in a member's excommunication, removal from their home and family, and for those of us who worked at the family law firm, as many of us did, the loss of our job as well. I found the open-mindedness of outsiders potent and heady. The freedom to consider ideas from multiple perspectives. The freedom to disagree with someone without demonizing them and ostracizing them. The freedom to question received wisdom without risking everything. I couldn't believe that I had gone my entire life not knowing that that kind of intellectual freedom was possible. It seemed like the whole world had been living in this utopia of open-mindedness, and I felt so privileged to have finally joined the party. Slowly, though, my rose-colored view of the world started to slip a bit. I became obsessed with trying to understand how my family, my intelligent, analytical, kind, well-intentioned family, had gotten to such a terrible place. From the outside, it was much easier to see the patterns that I was blind to while I was living them. They're the kind of destructive patterns we see in places where true dialogue is impossible, where the costs of dissent are so high that few, if any, are willing to pay them, and enforced conformity results. These patterns are the hallmarks of my upbringing: groupthink, confirmation bias, black and white thinking, an entrenched tribalistic mindset, and the inherent fear that accompanies it, the fear of being cast out of the group. Together, these forces led my family and me to the kind of blinding certainty that makes it impossible to honestly entertain opposing views. It just becomes too dangerous. Motivated reasoning can be a persistent problem for the best of us on our best days, but it can become nearly insurmountable when we allow ourselves to arrive at the conclusion that our view of things could not possibly be wrong, that we have nothing to learn from people who believe differently, that there is nothing outside of our perspective that can or should change our positions, or that there must be some latent evil in anyone who dares to contradict or even to question our ideas. Looking back at the sad trajectory of my family was illuminating, but even as I resolved to avoid the pitfalls that had derailed us at Westboro, I was surprised and then dismayed to watch as those same forces came to define public discourse in America and beyond. The division of the world into us and them, the casting out of apostates for the slightest deviations, the self-righteousness of a punishing call-out culture, and the self-censorship that results from it. A favorite author of mine put it mildly when she said, "The language of public life has lost the character of generosity." And as that language has deteriorated further and further over the past years, I have repeatedly called upon the habits that I learned from David Abitbol and others on Twitter. And here's where I'd like to linger for a few minutes. One of the most important lessons that I've learned since leaving Westboro is that this isn't just a story about the de-radicalization of one extremist. It's about the power of compassionate engagement to bridge divides that seem unbridgeable. I learned that in many ways, my story is not unique. In hindsight, I recognize that I responded in a very human way to people who treated me like a human being, and that the skills I learned from my friends on Twitter have application in our lives just about every day. Several years ago, I gave a TED Talk on this topic, essentially going over 4 of the simplest but most potent tools that I learned from my former adversaries on Twitter about how to engage with people on the other side of divisive issues. But there are definitely more than 4 tools, so I'll start with those, and then I'd like to share a few others that I would have included if they had given me more time. I want to stress that I think of these ideas not as obligations, but as opportunities. There are people for whom it isn't safe to engage, who don't have the bandwidth, or who just don't want to in a particular moment. And those limitations are real and understandable. So these are ideas and opportunities for people who are willing and able to take advantage of them. Okay, so first, don't assume bad intent. This is first because assuming ill motives almost instantly cuts us off from truly understanding why someone behaves and believes as they do. When we forget that they are a human being with a lifetime of experiences that shaped their mind and led them to this moment, it's very easy to write them off as evil or unreachable. And the conversation has a very hard time ever moving beyond that assumption. Number 2 is ask questions. Asking questions helps us map the disconnect between our differing points of view. That's important because we can't present effective arguments if we don't understand where the other side is actually coming from, and because it gives them an opportunity to point out flaws or concerns about our positions. But there's another really important byproduct of asking questions. It signals to someone that they are being heard. When my friends on Twitter stopped accusing and started asking questions, I almost automatically mirrored them. Their questions gave me room to speak, but also gave me a kind of permission to ask them questions and to truly hear their responses. It fundamentally changed the dynamic of our conversation. Number 3 is stay calm. This one may seem simple and obvious, but it isn't easy. It takes practice and patience. At Westboro, I was taught not to care how my manner of speaking affected other people. And as I've said, I thought my rightness justified my rudeness, harsh tones and raised voices and insults and interruptions. But that strategy is ultimately counterproductive. Dialing up the volume and the snark is natural in stressful situations, but it tends to bring the conversation to an unsatisfactory, often explosive end. Instead of lashing out, we can pause, breathe, change the subject, or walk away, and then come back when we're ready. Number 4 is make your argument. One side effect of having strong beliefs is that we sometimes assume that the value of our position is or should be obvious and self-evident. That if people don't get it, it's their problem. That it's not my job to educate them. But if it were that simple, we would all already see things the same way. We are all a byproduct of our upbringing, and our beliefs reflect our experiences. We can't expect others to spontaneously change their own minds. If we want change, we have to make the case for it. Those were the 4 ideas that I championed in my TED Talk, but I found these ones to be powerful as well. 5 is take heart, or to put it another way, be patient. It would be incredible if we could just share a bunch of facts with someone and have them instantly change their positions and agree with us. But there's a lot of evidence to show that the human mind just doesn't tend to work that way, particularly when it comes to changing core values and beliefs. If we go into a discussion expecting rapid change, we're very likely to be frustrated and disappointed, and way more likely to just give up. Instead, I try to remember that we are playing the long game. And this goes along with the next point, which is choose to see people as being on a journey. When we encounter someone in any given moment, it can be helpful to remember that this is just one point in the timeline of their life. They will not forever be the exact person that they are in this moment. And in the same way that we change over the years, and sometimes cringe at things that we said or did or believed in the past, there is hope for this person's perspective to change too. And we can be part of that change. And maybe they will end up being part of some change of ours as well. I have another close friend who used to be an ardent enemy of Westboro. And he said something to me once that I will never forget. He said that he thinks of my family, who are now still stuck in Westboro's ideology, as future former members and future friends of mine. That might strike you as Pollyanna-ish, and I'm not saying you have to take this point that far, but an enemy doesn't have to become your best friend for meaningful change to take place. Holding space for that change is a powerful model. Number 7, don't press your advantage, or don't go for the jugular. There are sometimes moments in these conversations where you have found the weak spot, the inconsistency, the contradiction in the other person's position. And the temptation can be to seize on that weak spot and press on it with all of your might. There is something so satisfying in realizing that both you and they know that you have them on the ropes. But I think this is often a mistake, because when you press someone who is in a defensive crouch, if you will, the tendency is most often to double down, to defend themselves at all costs. And there is enormous power in making your point and then backing off and kind of leaving them to sit with that point in the quiet of their own mind, to wrestle with it in your absence. A number of different people did this for me, and it showed a striking understanding of human psychology, because it was much easier for me to let go of what was wrong in my ideas when I wasn't actively defending myself against an attack. Just 2 more, I promise. Okay, number 8, be deliberate about cultivating empathy for enemies. You can also think about this as choosing curiosity over condemnation. Before getting into a conversation full of intense disagreement, you can lay the groundwork for success by making deliberate efforts to consider the groups that you tend to write off. Who are they? Given their experiences, can you understand why they hold the positions that they do? What ideas do you share? When you're intentional about searching for understanding and common ground, you will be better at engaging people with opposing ideas on the merits, instead of the mental caricatures that humans often form of one another. And number 9, practice engaging when the stakes are low. I think it's important to remember that these strategies are not necessarily natural or intuitive for most people. They are skills, and they have to be learned and developed. One way to practice is to be on the lookout for low-stakes disagreements that appear in your life with friends or family or colleagues, and not to trivialize anything, but even with kids. Practicing when the stakes are lower strengthens our ability to engage when stress levels and potential costs are higher. It has now been more than a decade since I left Westboro and lost my family. And while the trauma and regret of that part of my life will always be with me, it is accompanied by a deep and abiding sense of hope. My life was forever changed by people who took the time to learn my story and to share theirs with me. They withheld judgment, and they came to me with kindness and curiosity. They understood something essential, that listening is not agreeing. Empathy is not a betrayal of one's cause. These are the tools of effective persuasion. These days, I think about all of this as being less about saving people like I used to be, and more about how a pluralistic society functions through conversation and dialogue and persuasion and wrestling with difficult subjects in public and as productively as possible. And the more of us who are willing and able to reach out, to disagree without demonizing, the more likely we are to change hearts and minds, to heal divisions, and to create a better society for all of us in the process. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Megan, for those wonderful words of wisdom and sharing with all of us your inspiring and difficult journey. It indeed is a lesson for all of us that we can all do better simply by the act of listening. And today's gathering is testimony to that. It's a gathering of people of different faiths, people who may not profess a particular faith, but they've all come together to learn and be in company with each other. And so you sharing your beautiful journey, difficult but beautiful journey, is really remarkable. Thank you for that. All of you know that we are gathered in this holy month of Ramadan, and this month for Muslims who believe in the month of Ramadan is a month for fasting, prayer, reflection, and charity. From dawn to dusk, Muslims abstain from food and drink as both a spiritual discipline and also as a form of renewal. At sunset, which happens in about 6 minutes, so I have 6 minutes of this microphone. At sunset, the fast is broken with what is called the iftar. Traditionally, it is dates and water, and then it is followed by prayer and a shared meal. So after iftar, those who are able will join for the Maghrib prayers or the sundown prayers, one of 5 daily prayers for Muslims. That brief prayer, which is about 5 minutes, is a profound moment of gratitude and a reconnection with the divine. To signify the time of iftar or sundown, a call to prayer is made by the person who is called the muezzin. And this call to prayer, in Arabic, it is called the adhan. And it will be made from this prayer hall shortly. And the adhan will proclaim, in essence, that God is greater than all things. And it is an invitation to anyone to pray and through prayer find success. The call to prayer in the Islamic tradition is both spiritual and physical, because in making the call, the caller orients themselves towards Mecca, which is the spiritual center of Islam, and which is the direction that all Muslims turn to when they pray, just like Jews will turn towards Jerusalem when they are praying. And this call to prayer is a call for remembrance, but it is also a call to pause, to drop everything and turn to prayer and reflection. So when the call will be made in a few minutes, and those of you who are fasting, I'm sure you're looking at your watch several times, as I am. Sundown cannot come soon enough. For those who are fasting, you may rise and walk through the doors on my left. There are iftar stations as you will walk through the doors with dates and water. Even if you're not fasting, you can partake in that ritual. And after that, there's another set of doors that will take you to a hall where the evening prayer, the Islamic evening prayer, will be held. For those who want to join for those prayers, you're welcome to join. Those who want to observe, there are chairs at the back of the room. You can sit there and observe the prayers. But if you want to do neither, you can be in this hall, trying to network with each other, trying to know each other. This is also an intent of this gathering. Find somebody that you have not met before. Try to introduce yourselves to them. And again, as Megan said, learn about them. Engage them in a conversation. And after the prayers are done, the dinner will be served in the fellowship hall over here, approximately about 6:45. We are scheduling dinner time. The dinner has been prepared in a kosher kitchen. For those who may not know, that much of kosher dietary laws are also applicable to halal Islamic laws. So most food that is prepared by kosher standards would also adhere to halal standards. It is prepared in a kosher kitchen at the Jacksonville Jewish Center. Volunteers cook the food. And the ritual or the process of cooking the food side by side, Jews, Muslims, Christians together cooking the food, is a blessed ritual. It is also a time to learn about each other's dietary laws and the do's and don'ts of what works, what does not work. And it is also a time to get past what is comfortable to us. For those of you who have not spent time in a kosher kitchen, it may be a new experience. For those of you who may not know about halal dietary laws or kosher dietary laws, that also may be a new piece of information. Following the dinner, we will have a panel discussion. Megan will moderate the panel discussion with Rabbi Lubliner, Imam Bilal, and Reverend Kate. It will be a continuation of what we heard before, but this time she will be the questioner and our learned clergy will be providing the answers. And it will be, again, a time for mutual learning. So tonight we are very honored. For 9 years we have been gathering at the Jacksonville Jewish Center. This year we felt to widen the tent and create a different space for a repetition of a similar experience and engage people who may not have been at that venue or that event before, to welcome them into a different space, but share with them the same rituals and the same spirit. So that's what brought us over here. So it's almost time to break for the call to prayer. And the Muezzin, Alex, is he here? Can you please come up?
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Thank you, Ahmed. Wonderful recitation of the Adhan.